Oh man, I am very excited to be doing this video. You guys have been commenting this left and right in almost every single video that I have done. And that is playing Nintendo Switch 1 games on the Nintendo Switch 2, figuring out what games run better, games that just look magical now onto the Nintendo Switch 2. And I have finally taken the time to play a lot of Switch 1 games, and I now have a list of things to tell you on how I feel on how they run on the Nintendo Switch 2, because I did a lot of testing. And if you guys like this, we might make this into a whole series where I'm going through Nintendo Switch 1 games, seeing if the resolution's better, frame rate's better, stuff like that. But before we jump into this, I have to ask, we're so close to 21,000 subscribers. If you have not subscribed yet, I would greatly appreciate it, as we're trying to hit this goal by the end of the month, and we're almost at the end of the month. And we've been uploading every single day almost, and we're about to have our Too Many Games series, which a lot of you guys are pumped for those vlogs, so stay tuned for that. Let's jump into what I've been playing onto this system. Let's start with one that a lot of y'all have been requesting me to play onto the Nintendo Switch 2, to see if anything changed with it. Because if you followed my video from a few months ago, I was very critical of the Switch 1 version of this game. That game is none other than the Plucky Squire. Now, guys, the Plucky Squire is an incredible game. I talked very highly of it, but I said in my video that the Nintendo Switch version of the game should have never been released, as the frame rate gets absolutely ridiculous towards the second half of the game, and it's just something that really should have not been released. It felt like they were trying to take advantage of the Nintendo audience, because that's really what this game was for and being promoted and heavily inspired by, and I was so disappointed by the Switch version. So how did the Switch 2 version go? I put it in and I was blown away. All the issues that I had with this game were taken away. The frame rate was at a locked rate. The game was running perfect. I was very, very surprised, as from my understanding, this didn't even get a Switch 2 update. It's been found through the Switch 2, if you put a Switch 1 game in it and it didn't have like an update, a lot of the times it still fixes the frame rate issues that was having in that Switch 1 version. And so playing the Plucky Squire in here was absolutely incredible onto this system, and is definitely something that I can now highly recommend you pick up for your Nintendo Switch 2. However, I will say there was still one issue that was still happening for me in this game, and that was the game was crashing. I went through the whole final chapter again to see how this game would run, because I felt like that was the perfect place to see how the visuals, the frame rates, all that stuff would work. And the game crashed on me 3 times playing through the final chapter. So game crashes seem to be a thing that happens with this game, but honestly, I think it's really towards that final chapter, because I didn't have game crashes happen often until I got to that final chapter on the Switch 1 version. But in terms of the frame rate issues, you have nothing to worry about with this. This is definitely something I highly recommend you pick up on the Switch 2. I think it goes on sale a lot. It's a truly amazing game with such a unique style to it, and just the creativity into this game was something truly special, and I'm blown away with how it's running on Nintendo Switch 2. I was like completely thrown off, because I just wasn't expecting that, because on the Switch 1 it was just horrible, just to be honest with you guys. I did a whole review saying that it was very unacceptable that this got released on Switch 1 the way that it was running. Alright, let's talk about one that is also, I think, pretty exciting just because of the future of what this company could be doing for the Nintendo Switch 2. And that game is none other than Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. I put this in and it was automatically at a locked 60 frames per second into this game, which was honestly really throwing me off, because it's funny, this is one of the games that did not get updated. It just automatically fix the frame rate for you guys. And what was funny about it is the game was running at 60 frames per second, but when you get to the cutscenes, because obviously the game wasn't updated for this, the cutscenes was at 30 frames per second, and it was just so weird to see the game go from 60 to the cutscenes being 30, but it was an absolute spectacular time to be able to play a Dynasty Warrior type game at 60 frames per second. And I think a lot of y'all are probably going to be asking about Age of Calamity. How is that running? And Age of Calamity is actually at a locked 30 frames per second. I'm thinking that Nintendo will update that and to get it into a 60 frames per second game, as Koei Tecmo, in the creator's voice with the upcoming Age of Imprisonment game, was talking about how the Nintendo Switch 2 is able to do things that they would have never expected to do with these type of games when it comes to frame rates. So I'm expecting a big 60 frames per second patch is coming, and being able to play this all over again in 60 FPS is honestly quite stunning. The visuals look amazing. This is honestly probably one of my favorite ones that I tested onto the Nintendo Switch 2, because I talk very highly of this Hyrule Warriors game. I kind of wish that Koei Tecmo would go back to this world rather than focusing on the whole Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom style stuff right now, because I feel like what they did with this was truly special. But going through this is a fun time, and I think this is one that you should also be on the lookout for to pick up, because it just truly is an incredible game, and being able to see that at 60 FPS is stunning. All right, this is one that I didn't get a chance to really talk about on the channel, and that game is none other than Splatoon 3. Now, I have a very funny story when it comes to Splatoon 3. It came out around the time that I was still playing Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and at my job that I had at the time, I was working 10-hour shifts like crazy. So any free time I would do into gaming was Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and that game obviously came out in July. So for a good 3 months, the only game I was playing was Xenoblade 3, because I wanted to finish that, get an awesome video review. Even if it took me months to make, I wanted that video out there. And by the time I finished Xenoblade 3, Splatoon 3 was already released, and it had been out for about almost a month at that point. And so when I finally got the chance to start playing Splatoon 3, I was asking all my friends, like, hey, let's get on Splatoon 3, let's go, guys. And they all dropped the game by the time I was finally able to start this, because they just weren't a fan of the game, I guess. So I didn't really get to play Splatoon 3. I played a few hours on Switch 1, and I noticed the frame rate issues that was going on, especially the pop-in is what was very noticeable to me with that game. And I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of a rough game. And actually, Nintendo did release a Splatoon 3 Switch 2 update where it was supposed to optimize the game at 60 frames per second, make the visuals look way better, and I did a stream where I was playing through this, and I was quite impressed with everything that I was seeing. The big frame rate increase was amazing to see within this game, as I saw dips happen when I was playing it on the Switch 1, and especially not having to worry about that pop-in that you would be seeing, especially with some of the characters. I don't know what the term is, the video game term. The Coleman might have an official term for this. Depending how far away you would see a character, like where you are in the world, you would see it like drop frames. Like you would still see it, but it was like a combination of a pop-in frame rate. I don't know how to describe it, but the character was like 2 frames per second. I would describe it to like Pikmin, and on Smash Bros. 3DS, if you saw Olimar's Pikmin, it was like 2 frames per second. So that's what you would see if you were far away from the character. And now with the Splatoon 3 Switch 2 update, you don't have to worry about any of that. And it's been fun playing it. However, all my friends still stopped playing the game, so that stinks. But being able to stream this was a fun time. A thing that I will say that has been very disappointing, and I can't believe Nintendo didn't do this, is there's no mouse controls on Splatoon 3 as of right now. A lot of us thought that when the Switch 2 update was coming, that would bring mouse controls. That's like been the big thing of the Nintendo Switch 2. Not to mention, mouse controls into Splatoon 3 is like the perfect thing to put in there, with how accurate it is, and it's meant for Splatoon. Seeing that, you're like, yes, they're gonna put that in there. It's not out, and I know there was speculation that it was coming because there was seemingly video footage of mouse controls working onto Splatoon 3, and it never came out with this update. It's the biggest mystery ever. Nintendo, you need to put mouse controls into this game. And best of all, this Switch 2 update was free, so that was pretty nice to see Nintendo do that. So you guys can let me know in the comments down below if this is something you want to see me continue to do. But I decided to put a game into the system that I knew was not going to work well on the Switch 2, but I was curious to see if there was any improvements done to the frame rate or visuals. And I knew going into it that I probably wasn't going to see anything, but I would like to tell you the results that I had. That game is none other than Dead by Daylight. Now, Dead by Daylight, I have been honestly very praising the Switch version of this game. It visually looks rough, but I've always said it, they took a hit on the visuals to give you guys a locked 30 frames per second into this game. And I never experienced frame rate dips on playing on the Switch 1. So I thought what the team did with the Switch version was very impressive, and I will always be impressed with what they did to this, especially being able to put all the DLC still on to Dead by Daylight for the Nintendo Switch. And I was very curious to see if they were going to do an update on the Switch 2. Are they going to update the frame rate on Dead by Daylight for the Switch 2? So I put it in just to see what would happen. And nothing changed. The visuals was the same, the frame rate was the same. The only thing that I experienced that was new onto this game was the amount of crashes that I had into this game. Because this was one of the games that Nintendo said that may or may not have crash issues onto the Nintendo Switch 2 when you put it in. And it's still not been fixed. It makes me wonder if maybe they're actually making a brand new Dead by Daylight for the Nintendo Switch 2, a Switch 2 edition of the game, basically, with things like mouse controls, because again, Dead by Daylight with mouse controls on the Switch 2, that's kind of a perfect thing to have in there. So I hope that the team is working on something new for this, because I think Dead by Daylight on the Switch 2 would run amazing and look amazing, because obviously the Switch 1, visually, it took a hit. So hopefully the team is working on something there. I think this is a very special game, and I still think the Switch 1 version's great. Just don't play it on the Switch 2, because it's crashing like crazy. And I would like to know what you guys think about me talking about a game like this onto this type of list of testing Switch 1 games, because I know there wasn't an official update, and it was one that we kind of thought might have issues. Let me know if you want to see this, or if you want me to focus on what we've done with the other games that we just talked about. Let's talk about one that honestly came very unexpectedly, and that was No Man's Sky. Literally a day before the Switch 2 was being released, they announced that a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of No Man's Sky would be available day one, and it would be free to everyone that owned No Man's Sky for the Switch 1. And if you guys followed my third-party game series, I talked about how No Man's Sky, in my opinion, might be one of the best Nintendo Switch third-party games out there for the Switch 1. I was heavily impressed with it. However, there was one thing about the Switch version that a lot of people was disappointed about, and that was the fact that there was no online multiplayer into it. And the team Hello Games hinted that, hey, maybe it will come out in the future, but we really wanted to focus on getting everything else into the No Man's Sky Switch version before focusing on the multiplayer. And then we heard nothing back about the online multiplayer when they gave that statement. However, it still visually looked impressive, ran amazingly. I was heavily impressed with what they did here. So when the Switch 2 edition got announced, they immediately announced that the online would be available on there. And I was like, what? So I put the game in, I went ahead and started back my save file that I had on the Switch 1, and they took what was already, in my opinion, a visually great game on Switch 1, and took the Switch 2 edition and made it visually so much better. It was at a locked frame rate where I was not experiencing any dips, and it visually looked like a masterpiece. This game can get crazy addicting. So I kind of need to stay away from this game because I need to focus on other things. But No Man's Sky is definitely a game that I highly recommend you picking up, because I think you can get the Switch 1 physical copy for like 20 bucks, and then you can get the upgrade on the eShop for the Switch 2 edition for free, and boom, you got a Switch 2 game for $20 that's retailing for $60 on the eShop right now. This is one that I highly recommend, and I think a lot of y'all are gonna ask, hey Max, how was the online multiplayer? Well, no one wanted to play the game with me. In fact, let's see what happens when I call Coleman about playing No Man's Sky.
How are you doing, Max?
I'm doing well. I was wondering, did you want to play No Man's Sky now that there's a Switch 2 up? Now, for the last set of games that I tried onto the Nintendo Switch 2, I wasn't sure what to expect from this, as I've been very critical about this game on the Nintendo Switch 1. In fact, I at one point had to stop playing the game because it was a frame rate mess on the Switch 1. And when these got announced to have better frame rates on the Switch 2, I still had doubt. I wasn't sure if they were going to pull this off. And those games are none other than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. If I told you that these games were a frame rate mess on Switch 1, I am telling you, they were absolutely horrible. And when I put this game into the Nintendo Switch 2 and loaded into the world, I could not believe what I was witnessing. This game was at a locked 60 frames per second. I don't know what it is, but Game Freak was never able to figure out how to optimize their games on the Nintendo Switch 1. And it got worse by each game. And by the time Scarlet and Violet came out for this system, I think they literally just looked at the game and was like, this is alright. It's the Switch 1 version. It's fine. It was a disaster. I don't even know how Game Freak said that this was okay to release. I'll never forget when Nintendo had to release a statement with how bad these games were optimized and basically apologizing to the fans. I don't think I've seen Nintendo do that ever. And they've released some bad games out there. But Pokemon Scarlet and Violet was interesting. But playing it through the Switch 2, it still visually looks like a horrible game. They didn't update the visuals, which I don't expect the Pokemon games to ever look good, if I'm honest with you. Just because Game Freak doesn't care. They know that it's going to sell no matter what. I mean, that shows with Scarlet and Violet. They released it knowing it was a bad game and knew it was going to do ridiculous numbers. And seeing that these games got the 60 FPS patch makes me realize what the potential of these games could have been. But unfortunately, due to Game Freak's, I guess, poor gameplay design, I don't know what you would call that. Poor optimization, I guess is what we would call this. Is that a lot of people were just hating these games and were not able to finish them. But I'm glad to say that once you put these in the Switch 2, they are fully enjoyable games now. You'll still notice things like popping into the game and ridiculous glitches that you'll see in it that unfortunately does not get fixed from the Switch 2. But the key thing for me was the frame rate getting fixed, because the frame rate on the Switch 1 version was literally all over the place. And I couldn't believe how, I mean, they don't look good, but how good it was on Switch 2. It completely threw me off. It was night and day difference between these games. And it's definitely something that I would definitely recommend you playing on the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm hopeful that Game Freak's able to continue making these games optimized friendly for the Switch 2 as we jump into Pokemon Legends ZA. They should be able to continue the streak, right? You would hope so. I'm hopeful so. They got a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of ZA coming out, so we should have a locked 60 frames per second, right, Game Freak? We've learned how to do this, right? Guys, this was the stack of Switch 1 games that I played onto the Nintendo Switch 2. I definitely want to hear from you guys. Do you want to see me do this again, as I have many more games to try out onto the Nintendo Switch 2? I had a fun time doing this, as it was something that I was completely thrown off and was not expecting. I think at some point I might even do a top 10 video of the Switch 1 games you should play on Switch 2, just due to the major differences there are within this. But I want to hear from you. Did you enjoy this concept? Is there a game that you would like me to try next time if I do another one of videos of these? Let me know, share it. Let's hope that this is something that you guys will like enough to continue watching. But guys, I have been talking for way too much. Make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, Instagram, Discord, and all that good stuff in the description below. And I will see you guys Saturday morning for day 1 of the Too Many Games 2025 vlog series. TMG starts Friday, but the videos will start coming out on Saturday. I will not have any other videos come out until after TMG vlogs are out, so hopefully you enjoy this little 2-day break of MonadoMax content. Don't think I'm dead. I'm out traveling to Pennsylvania, so I can't, film videos. But I will see you guys at Too Many Games. If you're going to be there and see this before Too Many Games is happening, I'll be there all 3 days. Come say hi. Would love to meet you. All that good stuff. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.